Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk to you about storytelling in massively multiplayer online RPGs. I recently did a podcast. It was really good. Should be up in August. And the interviewer, who was asking me all kinds of really good questions. I mean, I love when a journalist or anyone interviewing you asks you really evocative questions that make you think, rather than what was your influence for this game? How did you design this area? What made you think of this feature? I mean, I get it. Maybe you've been told to ask those questions, but I've answered those a billion times. So what he asked towards the end of the, I don't even want to call it an interview. We just had a discussion for a couple hours. He said, what got away from you? He goes, I know you're retiring. What do you think got away from you? What's the one thing you wish you had done? And without even any hesitation, I was like, I wish I had made an MMO. Because I was on WildStar. A lot of my ideas made it in there, but a lot of them didn't. And I kind of regret that I don't have an MMO under my belt, because I loved them. I went through a period from like 98 to 2008, 2010, probably about 10 years, where I was really into MMOs. Played them a lot. Played them probably more than single-player RPGs. That's a regret I have, because there are a lot of good single-player RPGs that came out. But in any case, in 2010, I gave a talk at GDC Online in Texas. And I gave a talk storytelling in MMORPGs. Someone recently mentioned that is not available online. And I'm like, oh, I thought there was a video of it. So what I do is I'll go over it here quickly, because it was like a 40-minute talk, so I'll go through it faster. It was called Storytelling in MMORPGs, and I start with the meat. I always like to start saying what I'm going to say, and then I say it, and then I say what I said. Basically, you can break down storytelling in MMORPGs into three kinds. You have the zone stories. These are things that take place when you enter a zone. You meet an NPC. You discover a new area. There are quests to do for that NPC or in that area. And you learn kind of like what this area is about. Oh, this is a dark wooded area with a necromancer lair. Or this is a coastal area and they're having trouble with squid monsters. So you learn all that. You learn about a zone and its inhabitants. Then there's the epic world story. This is things that happen near the end of the game. And this is where I want to put all of the really what you would consider not linear, but the storyline is primarily at the end of the game. And I'll talk more about that later, but that's where I want the epic world story to be. At the end, when you've hit level cap and you've been to all the zones. And then finally, I want you to have a starting story. I think it's really important in MMOs to kind of introduce people to the world. And you can do that by having a starting zone for everyone, or you can do that by letting players pick backgrounds. And the story is kind of tailored for that particular player's background. You can guess which one of those I like. I like the latter. So let's dive into this and talk about it. So yes, my background is single player RPGs. And therefore I know I'm kind of biased in what I'm saying here, but I think it works. In a single player RPG, the huge advantage you have is that the world revolves around the player. The player's actions change things. And since it's the only player, you know the changes to the world are because of the player, and NPCs can react. Now, some of them have very linear storylines. You've all played RPGs that are linear. Some of them have non-linear ones, and they adjust to the player, where the player's going, what level he is, and all that. And then the game's over. Maybe you get some end slides. All that it makes the player feel special. Not in the sense that he's necessarily a chosen one or whatever, but that he made a story in this world. The problem with MMOs is, how do you tell a big zone-spanning narrative when players are one of thousands of players literally on that server, and ones of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions across all the servers? When they can skip what zones they want to go to, because there may be multiple zones that are appropriate for your level. When they can out-level content and then leave a zone before they finished it. When they might have friends helping them at different levels. When MMORPG players hate forced content. And forced content is either a dungeon you have to do or a cinematic you have to watch. They tend to hate that. If you can't differentiate between a world story and a zone story, how do you even tell a zone spanning story? So you have to be able to do that. And also with MMOs, unlike a lot of RPGs, some RPGs let you keep playing, but MMOs are designed from the very beginning to keep you playing forever. And that has to kind of factor into what kind of story you're going to tell. So I've seen a lot of failed approaches. Excuse me. I've seen a lot of failed approaches at this. I've seen lore bombs where you go into a zone and either there's a cinematic or an event that happens that you're forced to watch, or an NPC that comes up to you, forces conversation, and just drops lore after lore on you. Movies that you can't avoid. I've seen linearity. That's how they're forced it. Oh, you can't skip this zone. You will do this zone. I don't care that you're out leveled. I don't care that there are no items in it you want. I don't care that this is your third time playing the game. You will play that zone. I've seen it done with instances. And in the worst case, I'm not going to name it, the instances were solo. So there I was playing with a friend. We went into a cave and bam, we were in 2 caves, each of us in our own cave. And we couldn't see each other anymore. That one was awful. That one, I noped out of that game fairly quickly after that. I see failed approaches by saying we won't have a story. We just have lots of little short stories. And the player can link them together in their head and into a narrative. And then finally, I've seen sandbox worlds where people just go, there's no story at all. Nothing. Just go in there, kill things, take their stuff. It's a sandbox. The solution I recommended was take the giant, epic, world-spanning story and shove it all to the end of the game. What's great about this is the player by then will know all these characters, or a lot of them. We'll have met a lot of them along the way. We'll know most, if not all, of the locations, or at least have heard about the locations and kind of know what they're like. And the player's powerful. So you don't have to do any kind of level scaling. You kind of know the player's at or near level cap and has a lot of good items. So you can just plan for that in the story. And if they don't, it's okay for them to go, wow, this boss guy in the world story is really hard. I'm going to have to go get a better item. They can do that. So it's not like saying I won't have any other stories. Like I mentioned, you start at the beginning of the game with a story. You make it very small, very understandable. You can make it act like a tutorial if you want. So the story leads people through crafting and level up and things like that. I would recommend personalizing this. Maybe the player picked a background, and based on that background, the story the beginning story changes. Players love that. It also means when they replay, they get slightly different starting stories. It's fun. Then in the mid-levels, when people are finished with the starting zones, but they're not at level cap, so they're still leveling up, they're still learning abilities, they're getting items, they're crafting items, they're completing quests, they're earning achievements, they're making friends either to do dungeons with or in guilds. Trust me, there is more than enough to do in the mid-level without piling a epic story onto people. But they still will have stories. They still meet NPCs, find new locations, learn about factions, hear lore. Those are all part of the story. These are quests that guide them through those things. So basically what I'm saying is with those 3 kinds of quests, you can think of it as a graph. So if this is the beginning of time and this is, the amount of quests you have, and this is time going along. So time is higher over here. The zone story starts off with a lot of the background story starts off with a lot and quickly drops off. The zone stories stay pretty high for most of the game. You can even have them at the end of the game. You can still have level cap zone stories. The end story, hardly anything. And then you start to get a few quests that will lead into the end story. And then by the end, it ramps up really high. And when you're at or near level cap, you get a ton of end story quests. So the interesting thing about those end story quests is leveling is either almost done or is done. The stage is set. People are familiar with all the zones and they've heard backstories. You can start what I call the real story. This is now that they know all these people in these zones and they're well equipped. Hit them with a world-spanning epic storyline. It can involve tons of NPCs you've already met, some of whom like you, some of whom hate you, but you know why. They don't start off that way. They're like, you didn't rescue my daughter, or you ran over my cat. You know these things. It can have a big finish. You could put a 40-hour storyline at the end with a big finish. And that's the important thing. That epic world story at the end, I want it to end. But you don't have to worry. There's lots of other things the player has to do, and I'll talk about that. But the advantage of an end game story is the players are all the same level. So designers can assume they already understand their class. They've met powerful NPCs. They've traveled to most zones. They know the world setting. They own a flying mount, or they can get one, and they themselves are powerful. So examples of world stories could be, maybe there's a keep on top of a mountain in a early zone. Everybody tells you about this horrible boss who lives up there, but you have no way of getting there. So it's not even instanced. You just don't have any way of getting there. Later on, when you get a flying mount and you fly over there, you see that the landing area is swarming with really tough creatures. So you're like, I better come back here when I'm higher level. Boom. Example 1. Example 2, maybe you're in the middle of a level 20 zone and you're fighting along and you find a locked door leading down into a cave, a mine. When you go to try to find out about it, people tell you, oh, this is really powerful. It turns out it's a level 60 instance in the middle of that level 20 zone. And the key to that door is something you will get for a quest. But the NPC's like, oh, you better come back here when you're much more powerful. I'm not going to give you the key just to take it in there and die, and I'll lose the key. So that could be example 2 of how you could put a world story embedded in an existing zone. You can also use your end zones. You might have a level 60 boss in your level 60 end zone. He's elite. He has tons of lieutenants. You're warned by locals. You may need a very special device to kill this boss, and you get it during the world story. So these are things that you learn about, but you can immediately go after them if you want. There's nothing stopping you. There's no level or any other restriction on you to go after this character. What I like about this is there's a lot of ways in an MMO to feel special. You can solo things. There are consequences to your actions. We were going to put in a newspaper similar to Arcanum's, where when you did things, it got reflected in the newspaper. You can gain access to certain instances because of things you've done, makes you feel special. And NPCs react to you when you come by, when you talk to them, which is a reminder that, hey, you've done things, we remember who you are, you're special. Now, I talked about, hey, when you get to max level, there's still things that reward the player. There's additional stories. In addition to the world-spanning epic story, there's still zone stories you can go through. There are better items to find. More money to spend on a variety of money sinks the game can provide. Recipes to find for crafting. And just fame. Just doing things, getting better known in different zones, getting titles and things like that. Those are things that reward people for just being and playing in the world. So what do you do after the world story ends? People are always like, wait, your world story has an end. What happens? Well, there's still PvP. There's still crafting. There's still daily quests. We had housing, and part of housing was deciding what you could customize the outside of your house with plugs, like here's an archaeological dig, or here's a crafting station or whatever. And you could also decorate the inside of your house. So there's tons of things you want to do there. You might have a lot of item sets that you want to complete. Maybe there's a big bonus for wearing a completed item set. There's also rating. That's what a lot of games just rely on 100%. And that's just one part of what we give people after they do that whole into the game world story. If you want to do an expansion, the world story can always have some loose ends. Maybe the boss's lieutenant gets away, or maybe depending on how you finished it, there are things that could come back to haunt you in a sequel. Maybe some new locations are hinted at, like there are notes or things that talk about a faraway land or an offshore island that you've never been to. And plus, there are always consequences to how you finished it. Maybe there's a whole faction angry at you now, and because you killed this person, there could be a whole expansion based on that. Okay, that was my 40-minute talk compressed down into 15 minutes. So I hope this explains kind of what I wanted to do with my thought process of what I wanted to get done in WildStar for storytelling. It was informed by my single player RPGs, but I think it would have worked really well in WildStar. I pretty much stopped playing MMOs about 8 years ago, so I don't know if somebody's implemented something like this. Love to hear about it. But that was my GDCO 2010 talk in a nutshell.